I really was right about the fact that I could work with contractors and handymen really easily because it was just thanks to my dad and the unfrilly childhood I had as a girl. And then we ended up moving forward and transitioning on to multifamily. We could not scale our single family business to the point that we wanted, to our goal, even though we did have private lenders because there had been a credit constraint like 2008, 2009, and we went to a boot camp with Alan Cowgill for that. Having now banking and having credit, that wasn't a problem.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Journey to Multifamily Millions. I'm your host, founder and CEO of Zana Investments, Tim Little. And on today's show, we have with us Sharon Riddle. Over her career, Shannon has worked in companies, nonprofits, and government agencies providing business solutions in the areas of software upgrades and business process analysis. Sharon began investing in single-family real estate in 2005 with her husband and business partner, Dan, and they started the transition to multifamily in 2015 through initial education and passive investments in multifamily syndications. Sharon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tim. I'm really glad to be here with you.
Yeah, and it's great to have you. So you have a lot of experience on both the single family and multifamily side, but let's flesh that journey out a bit. Please tell us how you got started in real estate and how you got to where you are today.
Okay, how I got started is my business partner attended a managing your money seminar, and he came home and said, "Wow, Sharon, this is something great you can do. You have to understand, my dad was a construction subcontractor, so I was a construction brat. Having contractors in my childhood home was a very frequent thing that went on. And so then we picked up some single family homes and I self-managed because I ended up having to fire the person who was the property manager, and I felt I could do it better, and I inherited the job. And I really was right about the fact that I could work with contractors and handymen really easily because I could. It was just thanks to my dad and the unfree childhood that I had as a girl. And then we ended up moving forward and transitioning on to multifamily. We could not scale our single family business to the point that we wanted, to our goal, even though we did have private lenders because there had been a credit constraint like 2008, 2009, and we went to a boot camp with Alan Cowgill for that. Having now banking and having credit, that wasn't a problem because we had the private lenders, but it was just getting enough of the single family properties, and that kind of collided with appreciation in Dallas-Fort Worth because the homeowners were picking up properties even though they needed more repairs. They're just picking them up. And even the investors were not working to a formula. That was what I was viewing. And we always stuck to a formula because if you can't buy them right, it's never going to be right. And so that's how we ended up moving to multifamily. I had a single family mentor who introduced me to my multifamily mentor, and I went to his event because I had the promo code. I went for free, and then we joined his community in 2015 so we could get some more scale. And that's what we did. And that took us to multifamily.
And that's great. I just want to hit on some of the things that you talked about coming up. First of all, you went straight to the single family. And were you familiar enough with real estate investing that you knew how to do that? Or was that something that you learned at the Managing Your Money seminar or through reading books, even from the get-go?
One thing that I've always had is I've always had a mentor. So way back in 2005, we had an organization that was doing some real estate training. It was Russ Whitney's organization. And I still am I'm actually a sponsor in a real estate club in Fort Worth, Texas. And it was a person who was doing the training for wholesaling. So he and I have had this relationship this entire time, but we've always gone through with coaches and mentors. So we weren't just reading books to try to figure it out as we went. So coupled with my childhood background, and both Dan and I have MBAs, so we can code the numbers, and then having trainers through Russ Whitney's organization at that time.
Yeah, and that all makes a lot of sense. Let me talk to you about the timing, though, because you said you got started in, at least with the single family, in 2005. Did you already have a couple of properties by the time the 2008-9 financial crisis came around? And if so, what impact did that have on your portfolio?
What happened is that we were able to still acquire properties during that time period because we went to the Alan Cowgill's private lender boot camp and learned how to work with private lenders. So we had a system, we had the training to do that, and we really added several other properties to our portfolio through that. One was an REO. We had a couple of HUDs. At one point in time, Dan was acquiring, my partner was acquiring properties through HUDs because he could just estimate the offer. And they were treating the lenders were treating us as cash buyers. Yeah, they were treating us as cash buyers. So we were in a sweet spot regarding that. We just couldn't buy enough of them fast enough. That was the situation by the time we got really down the line in even 2010. We just couldn't buy enough of them.
Yeah, that's awesome because for you, this really presented an opportunity. It wasn't the disaster that it was for so many people. In fact, you were able to capitalize on that opportunity because you were in that unique position where you had that private lending, whereas everybody else was in a situation where they couldn't get a loan from the bank if their life depended on it because the banks kind of clammed up, right? They didn't want to lend out after everything that had happened. So that's really
Right.
interesting.
Well,
Go
I will,
ahead.
yeah, Tim, I will say too, Alan Cowgill had also been on my radar screen, and I know as real estate investors, we have to keep training and keep people on our radar screen and in our mind because you never know when you're going to have to pull something out of your hat as an investor. And that was just one of those things that the timing ended up right because I was aware that Alan Cowgill offered training for people who needed private lenders.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think you're so right with that ability to be flexible, to pivot when the situation changes, which, has certainly happened within the past year or two, and we can talk about that later. When it comes to the multifamily market, that can save you in some really bad situations and really help you succeed in the long term. The other thing that you talked about was the single family, and I think something that anyone who has owned single family investment properties can attest to is I can always manage it better than someone else can, right? No one will be as concerned about the profits coming off of that property than you will. Certainly not someone who's getting paid 8 to 10% to property manage it. And it sounds like you ran into that situation to the point where you were like, okay, I'm done with property managers. I'll manage this myself. Having done that myself as well, I guess I would ask, how were you able to balance the time involved? Because I imagine you were working a full-time job at that point and still trying to self-manage these properties, or is that not the case?
Actually, in the beginning, I was. And then I actually ended up being part of a layoff. And so I ended up just acquiring more properties. Dan and I split our parenting duties. And I was the person who dropped my daughter off and did some other things in her Montessori school. And he spent more time with his W-2 job in aerospace. So we were at that time, we could flip that. And the business was profitable enough to do that. But I did get caught in a layoff squeeze. And I know your listeners they've dealt with that or they may deal with it in the future. And it is painful because that is part of your identity. And I had been a successful senior business analyst for a transit organization in Dallas. And that was part of my identity, was wrapped up in what I was doing there. But I was concurrently doing both. So I just ended up putting more of my effort into our single family home portfolio, our business that we created.
Yeah, and I think that's great that you and your husband were able to divide the responsibilities. And like we talked about a minute ago, that pivoting. Yeah, you may not like the situation you were in or being laid off, but you were able to make it work. And that's something that a lot of people don't think about. People just assume that their W-2 job, their regular job is safe and secure, but a lot of those jobs can go away in an instant. And when I talk about passively investing, that's one of the reasons I advocate for it is because, okay, yeah, you have this 401k and that's great and all that. But one, you need to diversify. And two, that job that you have may not always be there. So you have to always be thinking about how to grow whatever nest egg you have so that you have that cushion if in the worst case happens.
Yeah. And I learned that lesson firsthand. And from then on, Dan and I were both committed to having another stream of income.
Yeah, and that's the broader point, I think, is having multiple streams of income. We could sit here and spout this statistics that the average millionaire has 7 streams of income. I don't know that the number of streams is as important as having more than one, right? If you have one,
Right.
you're inherently at risk because especially if it's for an employer, they can take that one away from you at any time. And that's not a very comfortable place to be in.
One thing I learned too is that you can utilize your cross skills and you can create another business, because that was the first of, we will have created our fourth one pretty soon. I had that ability in me from my training and my background, and you could redirect that into multifamily investing and single family investing too. I chose to eventually direct that into multifamily investing.
All right. And I know I personally, from the self managing perspective, hit a point where I was like, the amount of time that I'm putting into this doesn't equate to the amount of money that I'm getting out because I was getting into the multifamily syndication side of things at the same time. And I think it sounds like, just like you did, I started to shift that focus of both time, money, etc., from the single family side to the multifamily side. Talk to me about that shift for you and what that kind of looked like.
That shift was occurring in 2015. So what we were doing, because we had such strong appreciation for our single family properties, we were just selling them off. We were doing a stagger sale,
Mm-hmm.
and we ended up redirecting those funds into a multifamily company. So we moved that into an LLC and funded some more purchases. What we also did, and it was just that it was timing. Dan also received a substantial inheritance, and we utilized those funds as well as the funds that we had received through the stagger sale. And we were continuing to stagger sell single family properties all the way up to 2019 because we had some long-term tenants, and we just eventually had to sell the properties. They just could not get to the point where they were homeowners. We gave them some time to do that, but they just couldn't make it work.
Yeah, and acknowledging that neither you or I are tax professionals, what did that look like from a tax perspective when you had that big capital event, which was selling those properties? Were you able to offset that with some of the multifamily investments that you were getting into?
That is exactly what we were doing the whole time.
Okay, great.
That's why we were trying to do that. That's why we were trying to do a stagger sale, so we wouldn't have an event. And we were always trying to invest in at least two multifamily properties in any given tax year. And I will say we are now at the point where we have invested in 18 multifamily properties.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's important for
And
people to
almost
hear.
half of that whole cycle.
Yeah, and that's really important for people to hear because a lot of folks are coming into learning about multifamily after they've already, like you and me, had a couple of single family. Maybe they have 2 or 3 single family properties and they're like, oh, I don't want the huge tax hit if I just sell this stuff. So there are methods out there like what you did where you stagger that sale and then you're offsetting that capital event because you are investing in syndications and still getting that depreciation, which they get through a K1. And so, like I said, it helps offset, and they may not know that unless they dove a little deeper. So there are options out there for people who are looking to get out of that landlording and maybe even self-managing of their single family properties, and start that transition into the more passive side of things in multifamily syndications.
Yeah. Tim, I didn't even know how great the tax advantage was with multifamily when I was still in the middle of my single family self managing of that portfolio. Because you had that, you've experienced this too. You had that carryover cap every year. I think it was like 25K. And you had to do the carryover loss until you sold the property. You don't have the same you don't have the same tax benefits in multifamily. You have some superior tax benefits actually in multifamily that can really help you balance out the portfolio, because my partner still has his W-2 in aerospace. So our CPAs, instead of a person that we're having to fight over regarding the tax preparation, in 2019, we met our current CPA, and I'd been through three, and they understood real estate. And now it really is a meeting of how are we going to get to our tax goal? How are we going to get to that point? And we have a bookkeeper too. I didn't have any of that in the beginning, but we've evolved to that point because we have to be strategic, not only about the acquisitions, but also about the taxation.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. You have to start tracking a lot more things as you start to advance through this business. Talk to me about your first multifamily endeavor as a general partner, right? You talked about some of your passive investments. What did that first deal look like where you were a general partner and perhaps even bringing investors into the deal?
Well, at this point in time, while we have been best and final, we have not crossed that bridge in our journey. That is the rest of the story that's still evolving. Been best and final in a couple, so come close, but we're still looking to be on the general partner side of things too. And I think we can bring a lot of experience from the professions that we've had, as well as our single family days and being a passive investor since 2015. We really look at things a whole lot differently. And to be quite honest, I believe Dan and I will be very protective of our passive investors because we really have walked that walk for a while.
And I think that's a really important point and something that I tell to a lot of people who are like aspiring syndicators, but they've maybe never passively invested in a deal. I say that's great and I understand you want to do this, but my first recommendation is always to passively invest first. You learn the ropes and do what I call learning while earning. You're able
Exactly.
to you're able to ask the questions that you want to ask. So it's almost, I won't say free education because you're investing, right? But you're privy to a lot of the documents involved, maybe even the underwriting. You get to see the PPMs. You get to see all those things that you need to truly understand before you can go to investors and ask them for their money. Because I think it also gives you a real appreciation for the responsibility, right? That first time you make a passive investment, whether it's 25,000 or 150,000, it's still a big deal. And I remember how nervous I was, even though it was a relatively small amount of money of 25,000. To me, that was huge. And sometimes people forget that because it's a matter of scale, right? But to every investor, that money is a big deal. And I think you really understand that more when you've been on the passive investing side first. And so you take that responsibility very seriously once you're in the other shoes as the general partner and you're asking someone else to trust you enough to invest their money with you.
And at one point in time, we thought we were going to be on the general partner side a little sooner. But I think sometimes there's a reason things happen the way they do. And I think that probably Dan and I not only needed to know how that worked, how that felt, maybe we needed to really be able to feel it. And so I think maybe we needed to be able to really have a really big heart for our investors. So there's always a lesson to learn.
Yeah, and talk to me about what you're seeing in the market right now, because you talked about being in best and final, and right now is a very different situation when with regards to commercial multifamily than it was, say, a year or two ago, where you couldn't miss with a deal, especially if you bought right before COVID in a hot market. Uh, Rents were going up like crazy, as was the valuation. So now things are a little different. Things have cooled down. We're in a situation where rates are much higher. Sellers want more than many buyers are willing to pay. And so it's just a strange and different environment than it was a year or two ago. But what are you seeing as you're underwriting deals?
What I'm seeing is what you talked about. Buyers and sellers have still not come to a place where they are meeting. There are some deals that I've had to pass on for that we toured the property because we have GPs who are touring, and I'm one of them. And there's still that gap. There is still that gap regarding the buyers and the sellers. And I think that gap is going to decrease. So I'm optimistic that we're going to get to a point where buyers and sellers are close to being on the same page regarding that asking price, the sale price.
Yeah, I agree. That gap
Yeah.
is going to have to close before any business gets done. And right now, we're like 10 to 20% off from what buyers are wanting. And like you talked about from the very beginning of this conversation, you had your formulas that you follow. That stands true even today, right? We can't deviate from the numbers just because we like a property. That's not how this works. This is all an investment. So if I can't make enough profit to kick that off to my investors as well, then it just doesn't work and there's nothing I can do about it. And so I have to say, this is how much I can offer, not how much I want to offer, right?
You got to remain strong, be resilient on that. And it's disappointing when you have to walk away best and final a couple of times. You just got to be stoic about it. That's the only thing I can suggest. Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly frustrating, but I suppose it's better than the alternative of buying a bad deal where you're not only putting yourself in a bad position, but potentially your investors as well.
Especially since we've had so many rate hikes. As you discussed in 2015, 2016, when I came in as an LP, you'd really have to be doing some super, super dumb things for a property not to make a profit.
Mm-hmm.
And your distributions were going to be humming along for those passive investors. And in those earlier times, I had properties that went 3 times or above on return from that era. But post different situation.
Yeah, exactly. Some deals that were supposed to be 5-year holds were going full cycle in less than 3 years. And now normal is 5 to 7-year hold for a lot of what we're looking at anyways. So it's just a different time. And one, we need to let the market settle itself out, but also investor expectations have to change based on that too, right? Because if they were investing with the expectation of what they had from their last deal that went full cycle in 3 years and they got like a 2.5 equity multiple, maybe that's just not even possible in this environment. And so part of that, I think, is education on our part to help them understand why that may not be possible based on the circumstances, the 25 rate hikes or whatever it is from the Fed, where we're at, and all those different things that play into it that they just may not be aware of.
And in Texas, where a lot of my properties are, you've got insurance and you've got property increase in the appreciation still. You've just got the increase on the property. How much do you have to buy them for? And then the capital raise. that can appear daunting. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the easiest way to reflect is to say, are you paying more at the grocery store? That's inflation. That carries over into the supplies and everything else that's associated with adding value to these properties, right? When you're getting a quote from the contractor, all those supplies that go into that, whether it's the new flooring or the wood or whatever, if those are going up incrementally in price, then that's going to affect how much you have to put into it in terms of CapEx. And then the cost of labor, that's also been going up over the past year or two. So that's another cost associated. So I think if people understand that, it probably makes sense to them. Everybody wants to get the gains that they had when we were in the boom times, but that's not always possible.
It's hard to let go of them in some ways. If you've experienced it, you do have a little bit greedy feeling. It's, oh, wow, I wish those times were back, but they aren't. I think some better times are on the horizon. Maybe they don't look like 2015, 2016 for you and me, but they certainly may be better than they are now. Let's be hopeful.
Yep. Markets are cyclical. They may not look exactly the same, but they'll definitely swing in the other direction eventually. We just got to buckle down and not just wait for it, but find deals that still make sense despite a lot of them not making sense, right? Finding those needles in a haystack that still work for us and our investors.
Our team still hasn't put our pencils down. So we just have to find the ones that are going to work with the sellers that have a meeting of the minds, just we would have as buyers. So just got to see if it's going to work all the way around.
Yep. All right. Awesome. We do need to get into the turbo round. So
turbo round.
Yep. I'm going to ask you 3 questions that I ask every guest that I have on the show. And I just ask you for a quick, honest answer. Are you ready, Sharon?
Sure.
All right. First one. What is one red flag that every investor should look out for?
If a sponsor has had a capital call, or if there's some embezzlement or prison time. I'm talking about serious stuff here. I know. Hey, there's been some people. I have not experienced that. I've known some people who have experienced that.
Yeah, and capital calls, unfortunately, are becoming more and more common. Hopefully not the embezzlement or jail time.
Hopefully none of that stuff, and capital calls are not the same as that. But, I don't like them. You probably don't like them either.
Yeah, exactly. And that just comes down to transparency, I think, right? If you ask a question and they say yes, then okay, tell me more. But they should at least be transparent about their previous deals. That's hugely important.
Transparency.
All right. What is a myth about this business that you would like to set straight?
That you don't need any education to be able to do it.
Agreed. You shouldn't just start doing it from the get-go. And
no,
I think
they'll just jump in as, oh, I'll learn it as I go. You better have some foundation, in a community where you have some foundation, and just you'll avoid a lot of heartache and a lot of mistakes and loss of income.
Right. And whether that's coaching program, mentoring program, mastermind program, having that fallback of someone that you can call when you're in a tough situation and take advantage of their experience, leverage their experience or the experience of that group, I think is hugely valuable for those individuals and for their investors to get through problems. Right. All right. Final question. What does success look like to you?
Success for me now, because success looked like something different in different stages of when we were business building. And now success means, for me, a successful raise and a collection of investors that we bring on who are well educated and savvy and can be satisfied with the business plan. That's what success means for me today.
Yeah, and that's an important point that I don't think I've heard a lot on the show, is that success can be fluid, right? Like the definition of it can change depending on where you are in your life, in your business, etc. So I appreciate you pointing that out. Sharon, hey, this has been awesome. Please tell our listeners how they can get a hold of you and if there's anything else that you'd like to share with them.
I'm social, so I do have 3 different pages on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, and I do have a website. And I want to direct some people to the website today, which is www.sharonriddle, Excalibur, EXCALIBRE, Texas.com, because I do blog. I blog on my website, and by completing a few items on the contact page, you'll get 8 steps to passive investing. So you get a gift in the little autoresponder.
Awesome. I appreciate that. We'll certainly have all that information in the show notes. Again, Sharon, thank you for coming on, and I look forward to continuing to see you do big things on your journey to multifamily millions.
You too, Tim. Thanks so much.
Thank you.